Warning, this episode of Okay, What Now contains spoilers for the movie Life, which stars Jake Gyllenhaal, which is the guy in the middle, Rebecca Ferguson, which is this lady over here, Ryan Reynolds, and a few other people, but apparently they're not important enough to make it to the poster. So if you don't want to be spoiled on that movie, tune out now. The movie starts on the International Space Station, which is this, and it's got 6 people on it, and 3 of them are Ryan Reynolds, hello, and Jake Gyllenhaal, hello, and Rebecca Ferguson, hello. And it starts off where a comet comes across, and Ryan Reynolds goes out and gets it. I've got the comet, bringing it inside. And it's really scary. Ryan Reynolds brings in the rock into the space station, and then they do science stuff on the rock, and they find life. And at first, the life form is just really tiny, and it's really cute, and everybody's really excited, and they tell everybody on Earth, hey, we discovered life on this comet, aren't we awesome? And then some kids down on Earth say, we're going to name it Calvin after our school, because they go to Calvin Coolidge School. And so Calvin is there, and he's really cute and really tiny, and all computer graphics. And they make him grow a little bit by giving him some food or some nutrients or something. I don't know, they did some sciencey stuff, and they discovered that Calvin is like pure muscle and eye and brain. That's what they say. So he's like really smart, but really tiny. After a while, Calvin falls asleep, and they can't get him to do any more tricks. And one of the scientists is really sad and says, I'm going to go shock Calvin and see if that wakes him up. And they shock Calvin, and he's like, hey, don't do that. And he gets really mad, rah. And he tries to break out of his cage. And he's also really smart, so he figures out how, and strong, so he figures out how to break out of the cage. And when he does that, he grabs the other scientist, not one of the main 3 scientists that we know, but one of the extras, grabs his hand and starts grabbing it. And he's like, oh no, my hand, he's crushing my hand, he's crushing my hand. And it's really intense and scary. And then Calvin breaks out of the cage, and all of the scientists are like, oh, we got to get him, we can't let him get into the space station, woo, because that would be bad. So Calvin's floating around in the area in the lab that he's in, that he's trapped in, and he comes across a lab rat. Calvin comes across a lab rat, and he's like, hey, what are you doing? And in the very saddest part of the movie, the lab rat bites Calvin. I'm not going to let this rat actually bite the clay. And then Calvin says, yoink, and totally eats the lab rat and turns it inside out, and it's very sad, and none of the scientists are upset, but I was. And after it eats the rat, it consumes it, Calvin is much bigger, and he's floating around because he knows how to float in and no gravity and move really quickly and stuff. And so then the other scientists are like, holy crap, we've got a problem here. We need to get rid of this thing. So Ryan Reynolds comes along and says, I'm going to kill Calvin. And he goes into the lab where he is, and he tries to kill him with fire. Rah! I'm going to burn him. I've got a flamethrower, because everybody knows flamethrowers are on space stations. And he tries to kill Calvin with the fire. much bigger. And now all the other scientists are both sad that Ryan Reynolds is dead and freaking out because Calvin is locked in this airlock and is freaking out. So they push Calvin out of the space station into space. But he starts breaking the space station. Because Calvin couldn't live without air for a long time because he was on the asteroid for who knows how long without any air. So then one of the other scientists has to go out and stop Calvin from destroying the space station. And that scientist ends up getting killed, and Calvin ends up getting back into the space station, which is now broken. And he hops a ride onto one of the other scientists' legs and gets bigger. And then Jake Gyllenhaal and Rebecca Ferguson are the only two left. And they're like, I know a trick. We're going to use the escape pods to get out of here, because if we crash back onto Earth, then Calvin will kill everybody. And she's like, no, we can't do that. And he's like, yeah, we kind of have to. So they do. They get into two different escape pods. Ryan Reynolds gets in one, and he says, I'm going to sacrifice myself and have Calvin come with me, and I'm going to go out into space, and you are going to go in the other escape pod and go back to Earth. And that's the plan. They both get into their separate pods, and Calvin comes into Ryan Reynolds' pod, and then he ejects the pod with him, Calvin, and Ryan Reynolds, and they both go off in their pod. And Rebecca Ferguson goes off in her pod, and then at the same time, both of the pods get hit by some other meteor, and then you see one of them going off into space, and you see one of them going off down to the Earth, and at the end, it turns out that it is Ryan Reynolds' pod that crash lands on Earth with Calvin inside. And all of these boats are coming, and he's like, no, don't open my pod, because Calvin will go out and eat everybody. And then Rebecca Ferguson's pod went off into space. Oh, so sad, I'm doomed, I'm never going to see anybody, it's really horrible and ironic. And Ryan Reynolds goes down to Earth with Calvin, who's like gigantically huge, and it ends with all these other boats coming to rescue Ryan Reynolds and doom us all. The end. And so that's the movie Life. Thanks for watching. YouTube without you would be yappy.